Welcome to DIYEasyCrafts.com. How to make a knife with a rustic, scalloped, textured blade. Now this particular knife project I actually broke into two separate videos. This one is going to cover grinding of the blade and how we made this very rough, rustic looking textured, scalloped texture on the blade. And the other video is going to detail how we made this straw micarta and walnut scales or handles. And I'll put a link to the handle video right on this video. Now this particular knife project starts as a blank which were cut out on a water jet machine. These are blanks that I have in stock. They're available at DIYEasyCrafts.com. They're all made out of 1095 high carbon steel and they're all 3/16 thick, so it's a nice meaty knife. Now in order to get the textured look that I was looking for on this particular knife, I actually tried a bunch of different ways of grinding. This particular one is a little grinding stone that I used on a drill. That didn't work very well. I used a variety of different attachments. What ended up working best for me, and this is certainly might not be the way that everybody does it, but what worked best for me is a Dremel grinder with a drum sanding wheel, rough grit drum sanding wheel. I was able to get the most control out of this. And I was able to, make some nice clean grooves into that 1095. So the whole concept here is to create a texture on the blade prior to doing the bevel grinding and prior to doing the heat treating and tempering, so that once it does get heat treated and tempered, that blade is actually going to turn a very, very dark gray, almost a black. And then we will finish the bevel grinding, which will give a nice contrast. The bevels will be nice and shiny. The background of the blade will be very dark and very coarse looking. So anyway, I just made a variety of different grooves in the blade with that drum sanding wheel. Some of those grooves ended up being pretty smooth, a little bit too smooth for me, so I wanted to roughen those up a little bit. I went back to Home Depot and I bought a different bit. This one is very jagged, and all I'm going to do is go back over each one of those grooves and just roughen them up a little bit. And I'm sorry, I did not get this at Home Depot. I actually got this at Harbor Freight. It was a die grinding tool. It's a very cheap, inexpensive tool. This one came in a kit. I think the whole kit was $10. They do not last long. The teeth actually wear out on them very quickly. You can probably get about 2 blades out of each tool. But it did give me the desired rough look that I was looking for. So I just basically went into each one of those grooves and also kind of dragged that tool over the entire surface, all areas of the blade that are going to be exposed, beyond the area where we're going to grind the bevels. And this is all done before heat treating. This is all done on 1095 high carbon steel. The blanks, I've also pre-drilled the holes for the scales as well as for the bolsters. The bolsters are going to have 1/8 holes in them, and the handle, I'm going to use 1/4-inch holes, or 1/4-inch pins. So this is the blade texture finish. I've got some ground grooves, and then it's all been gone over with that rough tool. Gives it a really, really rustic look. So now, basically, I'm going to grind this like I do any other knife. I inserted this into a Bevel plunge jig, which is just 2 pieces of metal with 2 tapped holes, and it just clamps over the knife blade, and that just prevents me from grinding too far to one side, so that I end up with bevels that are even on both sides of the knife. I clamp this whole assembly into my Bevel Jig, and that's just a piece of angle iron with 1 tapped hole and a bolt. You'll see it when I flip it right side up. And basically you just adjust that bolt to give the angle of the bevel that you desire. Once the angle is set, you can just drag this across the belt sander, and the bevel will be nice and uniform. Before I actually put it in this jig, I did mark the center line of that blade, and that's basically what you watch. You watch the center line as you drag this back and forth across the grinder. You do want to leave a little bit of meat. This is only the pre-grinding of the bevels. I'm going to do the majority of the grinding now, and then I'm going to heat treat and temper the blade, and then I'm going to come back and do the finish grinding. So you don't want to make it too thin right now, that the actual blade. You don't want it to warp during heat treating. Once the bevel's done on one side, I can release this from my bevel jig, and then I'll basically just flip it over and mount it the exact same way but on the opposite side. But so far it's coming out exactly the way I want it to. This is really the first time I've ever done this particular type of texture on the surface of a blade. But it's starting to look pretty cool with the bevel running through all of those grind marks. And I'm just running it on the other side until the bevel is basically even. So one side is going to be consistent with the other. What's nice about this texture, or what hopefully is nice about this texture, is it's actually an easier way of making a knife, because after you finish doing your grinds and heat treating, etc., you don't have to polish the blade to a mirror polish. There's actually no finish on the blade. The only thing you have to do after heat treating is going to be to regrind the bevels to make them shiny if you want. You could certainly leave the bevels dark and mount whatever bolsters and handles you want. So it's a very easy way of making hopefully a very dynamic or dramatic looking blade and handle assembly. So this is the knife ready for heat treating. I actually gave this to my friend Jason Northgard. He's got a metalworking shop over on the North Shore of Long Island. He heated it up with a torch, the blade actually, until it was cherry red, no longer magnetic, and then quenched it in oil. Before I came back and did the finished grinding on the bevels, I also threw it in my kitchen oven, 375 degrees for a total of 3 hours. And then I left it in the oven. I turned the oven off, of course, and I let it cool gradually overnight. That tempering process really helps the blade to not be brittle. The hardening makes it hard, the tempering makes it less brittle. So you're going to end up with a very durable blade that holds its edge for a good amount of time, but hopefully it won't snap on you under heavy use. So this is going to be the finished grinding, and really all I'm doing is I want to make a contrast in the color. I want to grind away the blackness to the bevels and make the bevels shiny, so that it's really just the background color of the blade that's going to be dark, and the bevels will be nice and shiny. Now this finish grinding really doesn't take all that long. One of the main things that you want to be concerned about is you don't want that blade to get too hot. Don't forget it's already been heat treated and tempered. You don't want to get it, you don't want to ruin that. So quench it in water every pass or every other pass on the grinder. Once the bevels are polished on both sides, the blade is basically done. Now, I only sanded this with a number 80 grit sanding paper on that belt sander because I wanted a very rough and rustic looking knife. You certainly could have polished it with a 120, and make the bevels a little bit more polished or even greater than that. It all depends on how you want the finished product to come out. So here I'm mounting a couple of brass bolsters. I mounted these with 1/8 diameter brass pins and 2-part epoxy, and then I clamp that together. I make the bolsters a little bit oversized, and then I grind them once they're mounted to the blade. I'm also using a combination of straw micarta and walnut scales, and I'm going to pin these to the knife with 1/4-inch pins. And I did a whole separate video on making these scales. I was very happy with the way the scales came out. I'll post a link on this video. After the holes are drilled in the scales and they fit the bolsters appropriately or nicely, then I'm going to cut them out the outline. And again, just like the bolsters, I'm going to cut these out a little bit larger than necessary. And then I will actually, once they're mounted, I'll go back to the belt sander and back to a Dremel tool and finish working these so that the outside diameter of the scales match perfectly with the outside diameter of the full tang of the knife. So the scale is going to be mounted with those 1/4-inch pins, and I'm also using a 2-part epoxy that I mixed a little bit of black paint into, just a few drops, and that kind of matches or corresponds with the black liners. The black micarta liners were already glued onto the back side of each scale. And then once those pins are, fully inserted so that they protrude on each side, then I'll clamp this whole assembly into a vise. And then I'll also add some additional clamps onto the top so that the entire scale or entire handles really get clamped on completely. It's one of my little tricks of the trade. I always wear 2 pairs of gloves when working with this epoxy or whenever working with micarta or fiberglass resin. It just makes it very easy. You can remove one set and you're basically ready to go. Once the scales have, or the epoxy on the scales have dried, you can work that micarta and walnut combination with a belt sander, with a Dremel tool. You can sand it by hand. However you normally work wood handles. Works just as well on the micarta. And I finished off the handles just on the buffing wheel. And of course, you don't have to buff, nor do you have to polish the blade at all. It's going to be some real contrast to this knife. So on the blade, we have a very rustic scalloped texture, black or dark gray background with shiny bevels. The handle is made from a combination of straw micarta and walnut, brass bolsters, 1/4-inch brass pins on the scales, and 1/8 diameter brass pins on the bolsters. A very nice looking knife that was actually a very easy project for any do-it-yourself knife maker. Please check us out on the web at DIYeasycrafts.com. Be sure to check out all of our other knife making projects. And if you enjoyed this video, I ask that you please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to this YouTube channel.